The last words of the discourse are just sitting with me, dwelling forever in peace. John and I are so happy that you've joined us for this 10-week exploration into this discourse on these 8 realizations of great beings. And we as we talked about how to approach this, and for those of you who practiced with us before, you know that when John and I are giving talks on a particular subject, we really give ourselves to that, whatever that subject matter is. And this has been no different from that. And so we've actually spent much of the last 4 months giving ourselves to meditation and study and discussion with one another. And so we thought it would be important for you to hear some things about the origins of this discourse and why Tai Thich Nhat Hanh considers it a foundational teaching for every student of the Dharma. I owe a lot to one of the monastics, Thep Hap Hai, who was for many years a monastic at Plum Village and then at Deer Park, and he has given a great deal of time to the study of this particular discourse, and he says that Thich Nhat Hanh really emphasized it with the monastics, and Phep Hai actually wasn't that. He thought of this discourse as a kind of laundry list, is how he described it, and it wasn't until he really gave himself to the study with Tai that he really began to let it unfold and open to him. And so he's been a great source of information for me, and he's written a book that hasn't been published yet. Hopefully we'll all be able to get it soon, and deepen our study into this discourse. So for those of you who don't know this, Tay translated this discourse originally for the boat people in the mid-70s, the refugees of the Vietnam War, who were escaping after the end of the war in Vietnam, after the fall of Saigon in 1975. And so many people in the South were escaping. They were leaving Vietnam in rickety, mostly unseaworthy boats, with far more people on each boat than each should have. And they were beset by pirates, and they were beset by people trying to stop them, and countries refusing their entry. And so Thich Nhat Hanh wrote this, translated this discourse from the Chinese in order to give the boat people, give his fellow countrymen a clear and concise and accessible, simple approach to studying and being with the Dharma. He wanted them to have this discourse to accompany them, to help them take refuge during their perilous journey to freedom. And isn't this discourse exactly what that describes? Our perilous journey to freedom. So the discourse comes to us in its current form when it was translated into Chinese in the middle of the 2nd century of the Common Era. So middle of the 2nd century, about 150 CE, AD, is where we first see the Sutra translated into Chinese. Now, many of us are aware that there have been essentially 2 transmissions. When we think of the transmissions of Buddhism, there were 2 transmissions. One was a southern transmission of the Buddha Dharma through southern India, across to Sri Lanka, up through Indonesia, and then to Burma and what we consider today Indochina, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And there was also a northern transmission. And that northern transmission, we always hear, well, the Dharma went north to China, then to Korea and Japan, and then again down to Vietnam. But we don't really hear much about how that actually happened. So how did Buddhism get from India to China? You know, the southern route is pretty open. The northern route is across the Himalaya. So how did that happen? So I want to actually show you a slide, but first I'll just tell you, so the way that happened is the Silk Road. And how many of you remember hearing about the Silk Road in school? And so when I first started studying the Sutra, what I remembered about the Silk Road was Marco Polo bringing pasta from China, right? And so this is just this wonderful story about the impact of the Silk Road on our practice, on the transmission of Buddhism. The Silk Road was, and I'll put up share the screen. Just want to check. Is everybody seeing that? Okay. So the Silk Road was an ancient trade route that linked the Western world with the Middle East and Asia. So it linked the China and then the Middle East, India, and then Europe. It was a major conduit for trade between the Roman Empire and China, and then later between medieval European kingdoms and China. And that's where Marco Polo comes in the 13th century. So this area here is the Tigris and Euphrates Valley, and this is what we, is my cursor showing up there too as well? Okay, great. This is what we think of and speak of as the cradle of civilization. So notice that not only was there this overland route that was the Silk Road, but there was also a sea route as well, and more than one. So it was land and sea. And the Silk Road was already an ancient network of trade routes when it became more formally established during the Han Dynasty of China. And that's what started in about two centuries before the Common Era. So this was an ancient, all of this, even though it became more formalized during the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire, it's ancient trade routes that brought east to west, west to east. So it linked the Roman Empire and Asia for silk trade as well as for other commodities. And the Silk Road not only promoted commodity exchange, but also cultural exchange as well. And in fact, the Silk Road generated the earliest forms of globalization because it aided in the exchange of cultures, goods, and ideas. And it stimulated intercontinental transmission of thought, philosophy, and religion. So Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, they all intermingled here along the Silk Road. And hundreds of years of trade and invasion brought Buddhist monks into contact with merchants and nomadic people in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, that's here, in Pakistan, in India. And together with these merchant caravans, Buddhist monks went all over the Middle East, Central Asia, and China, teaching this new practice, teaching this new approach to living. And we don't think of Buddhism taking root in what we now consider the Middle East. Like, we don't really hear about that at all, ever. But that's actually what happened. It did. By the first century of the Common Era, that is by the first century CE, Buddhist monasteries sprang up all along the Silk Road, not just in one area, but all along the Silk Road. In fact, at one time, there were nearly 40 Buddhist monasteries near what is now Kabul in central Afghanistan, the capital of Afghanistan. There were 40 Buddhist monasteries. How many of you remember the Bamiyan sculptures? A few years ago, there were sculptures that were in Afghanistan that Islamic peoples decided to destroy these sculptures of the Buddha. And that was there in Afghanistan. But it was there where there were many, many monasteries, Buddhist monasteries. So there were hundreds of Buddhist monasteries along the Silk Road. And there are 37 well-known monastics and translators who were born along the Silk Road. They were instrumental either as missionaries taking Buddhism to China, or they were known for translating Buddhist texts into Chinese. And the earliest known translator, the earliest known one, the one that we have a record of, his name was An Shigao. An Shigao, it's spelled like Anshigao. An Shigao, or in Vietnam, An Te Cao. And he grew up in Parthia. And where Parthia is right here in the heart of the Tigris and Euphrates area. So in what was also partly Persia, became Persia at one time. So the country he was from was Parthia, and he was a Parthian prince. And there's some lore about him that he, like the Buddha, was a Parthian prince who was introduced to Buddhism and became Buddhist and began to practice, and he was very instrumental in he was the person who translated the discourse on the 8 realizations into Chinese for the Chinese. And in fact, he left his home and kingdom and settled in Western China and established a number of Buddhist training centers there. So he was the first of a wave of Silk Road Buddhist teachers who collectively brought Buddhism to China in the 2nd through the 5th century. So what? Why do we care about it? You can tell I love this stuff. Margot's smiling. Margot loves this stuff too, I know. We love the history. So it's important to understand the deep roots of Buddhist philosophy and practice on influencing Western civilization and culture. And we know that what happened here by the 7th and 8th century, as Islam was rising, that Islam really became the predominant religion in the area. But Buddhism had been very significant in this area. Like Phap Hai, I love telling the story about how this discourse came about and how this we have come to benefit as Westerners because there were people all along the Silk Road that took the time to translate the Dharma and the teachings into other languages. So, I'm sorry, we can stop the share on that. So, let's now jump into the discourse. Thich Nhat Hanh writes that this discourse is completely in keeping with the teachings given by the historical Buddha, though it is considered a Mahayana teaching. Most sutras start, the sutras that we're familiar with. Thus have I heard. When the Buddha was staying one time in this monastery or that monastery in the Jeta Grove or here or there. Thus have I heard. Well, this discourse starts, disciples of the Awakened One should recite and meditate on the 8 realizations discovered by the great beings. It actually says all disciples of the Awakened One. That's all. Past, present, future. This discourse is a love letter to you. All beings by nature are Buddha, and awakening is our birthright. So when Thich Nhat Hanh chose this for the boat people, what was he giving them? He was giving them a clear, concise, and relatively easy to remember elucidation of the whole of the Dharma. The discourse on the 8 realizations was significantly important today because it clarifies insights that arise on the path of awakening. And these insights offer us signposts and guidelines to help us recognize and take refuge in our own goodness, our own intrinsic Buddha nature. So they comprise 8 concise, as I said, relatively easy to remember points of guidance from our practice. And I would tell you, having studied this now 4 months, this discourse, these 8 realizations encompass the whole of the Dharma. There is nothing left out. They offer us objects of practice that are both contemplative and practicable. That is, they are fit for meditation in and of themselves, fit for meditation just as they are, as well as being practical guidelines for how we can apply them in our daily life. Their focus is simplicity, generosity, compassion. All core teachings of Buddha Dharma are contained in the messages of this discourse. Interbeing is at the heart of each realization. The 3 marks of existence are here: impermanence, non-self, nirvana. Nirvana being the falling away of views. The 3 marks of existence are right here. All four of the noble truths are right here. The 8 realizations expose the root causes of our suffering: greed, hatred, ignorance, and importantly, they give us the antidote. You know, the Noble Eightfold Path. It's all right here. The path leading from samsara, the painful cycle of birth and death, to liberation, to freedom. It's all right here. Right view, right intention, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, definitely, right mindfulness, and right samadhi, right meditative absorption. It's all right here in this simple discourse. John and I had the good fortune about 10 or 15 years ago to study this discourse on a week-long retreat with our teacher, Eileen. And she invited us to memorize the discourse during our 7-day retreat. And I know that John and I both had committed it to memory at the time. And I know that over time I've lost some of that. And I'm not going to invite you to well, maybe I will invite you. If you want to, memorize it. Anybody who's willing to memorize it, I'll re-memorize it and start again. But I thought what I would do is that I would give you a simple list of these 8 realizations that are 1 word, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. It's a simple list that summarizes the 8 realizations. And tonight, after I finish and John finishes, I'll put them in the chat and you can copy and paste them. And I encourage you to memorize, at least memorize this list in this format. So you're not going to unmute yourselves at the moment, but you are going to repeat after me. I'm going to say each one once, and then I'd like you to just say it with me. So you can just close your eyes right now and just listen as I say each one. So I'll say it when the first realization is impermanence. So now say it with me. The first realization is impermanence. The second realization, more desire brings more suffering. Repeat it with me. More desire brings more suffering. The third realization, the mind endlessly searches outside itself and therefore never feels fulfilled. The third realization, the mind endlessly searches outside itself and therefore never feels fulfilled. The fourth realization, I'm translating the word indolence. So the fourth realization is laziness is an obstacle to practice. Repeat it with me. Laziness is an obstacle to practice. The fifth realization, ignorance is the cause of the endless round of birth and death. The fifth realization is ignorance is the cause of the endless round of birth and death. The sixth realization, poverty creates anger and hatred. The sixth realization is poverty creates anger and hatred. The seventh, getting caught by sensual desire leads to problems. The seventh is getting caught by sensual desire leads to problems. And the eighth, a powerful one, the fire of birth and death is raging, causing endless suffering. The eighth is the fire of birth and death is raging, causing endless suffering. So I think in this simple form, whether you join me in memorizing the whole discourse, or that we just commit ourselves to remembering these 8 simple phrases that point us right back, we can commit these to memory, and then we can use them to touch our inherent birthright of awakening. These 8 realizations reorient our point of reference. Who are the great beings that we're talking about? We are, my friends. We who contemplate and practice these realizations are the great beings. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So Mike talked about broad strokes, about the Silk Road, about moving across continents, about cultures coming together. And I'm going to talk about one word. One word. But first, I want to say just a few words about what is a practice period. Why are we doing this? So a practice period is a recognition that all things exist in cycles. There's day and night. There's summer and winter. There's spring and fall, growth and decay. So practice also has cycles. And the cycles of practice are intensity followed by rest. And a practice period is a time of intensity. In practice we have retreats that are followed by lazy days. That's the cycle. And we have insights that are followed by integration of the insights. That's the cycle. So we're going to dive in really deeply on this 10-week period, and we're going to make this an intense study period. And we're going to focus our hearts and our minds so that insight has the possibility of arising. And that's the function of a practice period. Now, another question I want to touch before I go into my one word is, why would we study a sutra during our practice period? Well, the reason is a sutra is a mirror for our own wisdom. It's a mirror for our own wisdom. A sutra is not a textbook. It's not a description of something out there. It's a mirror in which we see our own goodness reflected back to us. It reminds us very often, yes, that's what I know. That's what I know. So those are the two things I wanted to say before I talk about one word. And that word is wholeheartedly. It's the very first word of the sutra. Wholeheartedly. The first paragraph of the sutra, as Mike said, and we read earlier, wholeheartedly, day and night, disciples of the Awakened One should recite and meditate on the 8 realizations discovered by the great beings. Wholeheartedly. What does it mean to do something wholeheartedly? Well, what I'd like to suggest is that wholeheartedly means that we offer ourselves to the sutra. And we offer our minds, our hearts, and our bodies. What do I mean by that? So offering the sutra our mind means using our intelligence. We're offering the sutra our intelligence with our mind. So as Mike said, one of the ways we can do that is we memorize it. We learn the words as they are. And as Mike said, again, we highly recommend you do that. It was very helpful to us, and it's still there for me. And what I discovered when I memorized sutras in this way is that in the moments when I need the wisdom to come forth, it's there. It's available. If I haven't memorized it, I might miss out on it. So that, I notice a phrase or a word from a sutra will bubble up when I'm most uncertain. I've received the help of it, but only if I offer it my mind. So another way to offer it your mind is to summarize it, just like Mike did. Put it into your own words. Make its essence your own by voicing it in the way you would make it, you would see it most clearly and quickly, so we could summarize it. So we memorize it, we summarize it, and then the third way we use our mind is to understand it with our intelligence. So Mike gave you lots of background to help you understand where this came from. This sutra wasn't something from some strange land. No, it was from the very cradle of civilization that we all come back to. We understand that it's us. So Mike and I have made an effort to understand it these last few months. We've lived with the sutra. We've used our minds to make it alive for us. So to offer our mind the sutra, we memorize, we summarize, we understand. But that's not enough. If we're really going to be wholehearted, we can't just offer our mind. We have to also offer our heart. And offering the sutra our heart means feeling the sutra. Feeling it. To feel it, we watch what arises in us as we study and contemplate the sutra. We notice, which words am I resisting? When I resist something in a sutra, I pay attention to that because my resistance might indicate where I'm stuck, where I'm caught, and therefore where I'm suffering. Also, I can offer my heart to the sutra by noticing which words feel immediately true. When I feel, oh yeah, that is it. I know this. Well, that is a recognition of my own wisdom. That's the looking into the mirror aspect of a sutra. So we offer the sutra our heart by being willing to feel what comes up as we study. Both resistance and immediate joy and acceptance. We feel them both. But just offering our mind and our heart isn't quite enough. We have one more aspect of ourselves that we need to offer to the sutra, and that is our body. So offering the sutra our body means diving all in without reservation. All in. And what I mean by diving all in is that I am willing to experience the bodily sensations that the sutra brings forward. And I trust my bodily sensations more than my mind. My body speaks the truth to me if I'm willing to pay attention to it. So when I offer the sutra my body, I'm asking myself, can I feel vulnerable and undefended? Can I experience that? The sensations of feeling vulnerable in my body? Am I willing to feel my constrictions and my judgments come up and really experience it? To not push it away? Can I bodily experience these chronic self-protective tendencies that I have? And I imagine that you do too. I protect myself by turning away. No, not that. Or ignoring it. Or another one is I rush past that uncomfortable feeling in my body of not knowing. I read these words and I think, that makes no, and I want to rush right by that. But if we're willing to offer our body to the sutra, something really important and helpful happens. Our body becomes a diagnostic tool. We can feel into our stuck places, and we can feel into our freedom. We know where we are on the path. Our body's a diagnostic tool. So another way to say, offer my whole self, my mind, my heart, and my body to the sutra, might be to say, we don't just study the sutra studies us. We don't just study the sutra studies us. And we have to assent to the sutra studying us for that to happen. We have to say yes. Mike and I, 20 years ago or so, said yes to the 14 mindfulness trainings studying us. And over that time, the mindfulness trainings have been showing us where we're caught and showing us where we're free It shows us our wisdom as it emerges. So it's been a beautiful, beautiful thing to do, to sit together and recite those mindfulness trainings, which is just like reciting a sutra, by giving our whole self to it and using our bodies as this diagnostic tool and letting the sutra study us. So wholeheartedness is a method we use to engage with the sutra, but wholeheartedness is also the result of engaging with the sutra. Wholeheartedness is both a method and a result. The method is that we bring our whole selves to the sutra. We offer our minds and our hearts and our bodies to it. But the result is that we're rewarded with wholeness. It transforms us. Offering ourselves wholly to the sutra shows us our whole self. It's really magical. Interbeing, right there. Interbeing. We offer wholeness, we are wholeness. When we do that, our whole self sees with the sutra's insights. As we study this sutra, what seems like the realizations of great beings throughout history, you will begin to recognize as your own insights. These 8 realizations are an expression of your own goodness, your own wisdom, your own beauty. And as Mike said, the more you offer yourself to this sutra wholeheartedly, the more that you'll see you are already one of the great beings. This is not a textbook about someone else, somewhere else. This is a description of you, right now, as you are. Wholeheartedly, day and night, disciples of the Awakened One should recite and meditate on the 8 realizations discovered by the great beings. Thank you all.